Hi, everyone. My name is Ryan Zellner. I'm the CEO of the International Society for Music Education. And this is our second episode in the series of Our Stories, Our Members. And with us today, we have Mr. Hayden Mitt. Welcome, Hayden. It's great to have you with us for the second installment of this illustrious podcast.
Wonderful. Thanks for having me, Ryan. It's nice to see you again.
So, the first question that we start off with is, how did you get started with music?
Right. Well, look, I'm still a young bloke, so it's still in fairly recent memory. My mother put me into piano lessons when I was, I think, about five from memory. I wasn't terribly interested, but she wanted me to learn with her teacher. My late mother was very fond of her music teacher, and she was stern, but a very good instructor, and she definitely made me a good pianist. And then at some stage, I think around third, I did that for many, many years, and I think around 12, I thought that maybe if I learned the guitar, that girls at school would like me more. So I picked up the guitar, and from there, I think I gravitated a little more to that, uh, and that's led me through, yeah, a bit of a performance career, and now into research. But it was, yeah, I was just thrown into piano lessons. I think like many children of my generation, I imagine.
So, first of all, where did you grow up that you were taking these piano lessons?
Yeah, so I'm in Australia. You can probably tell from the accent, and I grew up in Melbourne, so in the state of Victoria, right down the bottom there. Uh, and I grew up in a fairly, I wouldn't say I was right before maybe it gets regional. Regional being, there's you start to lose those services. I was right before that gap, so I wasn't terribly close to the city of Melbourne, and I was in a suburb with a lot of refugees, asylum seekers, and various other kinds of immigration. So I had the fortune of having a lot of at my piano lessons. I would walk in behind a friend of mine from Hong Kong, and the friend who would pass out for me when I was leaving my lesson would be from Sri Lanka. So it was a wonderful place to grow up and a wonderful way to grow up out there. But yeah, Australia still in Australia to this day.
So which instrument did you like better? Did you like piano or guitar better? Or is that a tough question?
I no,
You
it's
don't want to offend.
but I don't want to offend either party. No, one of my greatest regrets is that I didn't continue with the piano. I think the piano has more of an elegance to it than the guitar, perhaps. I'm sorry, guitarist. But I ended up in the jazz guitar tradition, and there is something. Maybe it's that I don't like being told what to do. That jazz sort of what would you say? Maybe I gravitate to jazz for that reason. But I think of the two. Look, I'm a guitarist. I'll stick to my guns. I made my decision, and I'll go to the grave with it.
So was there or is there a big jazz scene in Australia, or is
Yeah. Well,
that
it's
easy for
certainly
you
not as
to
big as other
integrate into?
countries. Was it easy for me to integrate into? Well, that's a really good point about why the luck I had of being in Melbourne, I suppose. Melbourne, I would classify as probably realistically the capital of jazz in Australia. There's a lot of tremendous jazz musicians all over Australia. But Melbourne, there seemed to be, at least while I was playing, there was quite a concentration there. So I I got into jazz really by accident. My school, I had very few lessons on the guitar before I realized again I didn't like being told what to do. Um, and he was by no means the premier jazz guitarist in the country. I ended up learning from that individual later, but he just said, "Have you heard of this thing called jazz?" And he started playing me some, I think it was some bossa nova tracks, and I was really fascinated by these chords. They didn't sound like the ones I'd heard in rock and roll and like the punk music I was listening to at the time. But then, well, I was able to, I wouldn't say assimilate necessarily, but I was able to weave my way through into the jazz community. The jazz community connects to the R&B music community here, and R&B connects to a great many other things in the Melbourne scene. So it was very fortunate being in Melbourne to tie back into how I ended up in the scene. And jazz was just sort of, again, much like the piano by my late mother, it was just thrust upon me, and I liked it, so I kept going.
Hmm. That's awesome. So as you sort of matriculated through the grades in school, and then eventually you decided you want to be a music major, is that the or major in music, or how did that come about? Was that
Yeah. I think much to my father's dismay, and I think he's proud of me now. He's told me so, so I'll believe him. I I think he wanted me to do something like to be an engineer or something. That's his discipline, and he's a very numerically and quantitatively oriented man, and I can't say I ever was or am necessarily. But from memory, I was thinking, do I want to be an architect or do I want to be a psychologist? In deciding what I wanted to do at university, and I realized, well, I can't draw, and I don't want to watch people cry, so I probably can't do either of those jobs. And I thought, well, maybe I'll be a musician. And then I think after I made that decision, I it all fell into place from there. And if I had to make that decision again, I'd make it the same way 1,000 times. And from there, I dictated a lot of my classes, throughout the school and into university. I did 2 years at a small institution down here called the Box Hill Institute of Music. It was attached to a technical college. I believe it still is. And I did a couple of years there, but they didn't necessarily have the jazz that I was after. So I ended up going to Monash University afterwards, and they had a wonderful jazz program, and I believe still do. I haven't kept up with many of the staff there, but I yeah, the decision was, do I want to do this job with it, option A or option B, and I chose option C.
Right. Right.
Who knows why?
I always find that fascinating because, like, in my own life, I was really convinced I too was going to be an engineer, and I planned on
Oh,
being a nuclear engineer because it was one of my cousins had been a nuclear engineer, and all my path was moving that way through public school. And then I got to my
right.
my last year, and I was like, I don't think I'd want to crunch numbers all day long. I just couldn't imagine
Yeah,
myself sitting in a cubicle doing those things all day long. And I was like, why don't I major in music? Yeah, that sounds good. And just
that sounds
it
yeah.
made a left turn. So I always find it fascinating. Like, I believe Martina from the first episode was like, she's like, I knew this is what I wanted to do, even
Mm.
though, she had some other interests here or there with astronomy or something like that, I believe. But like, then she sort of centered in. Sometimes we go and then we all of a sudden we just course correct back into it. I always find that fascinating. So what's your current
Mm.
role right now?
Within ISME, you mean?
ISME or at the university?
Uh,
Like what are
and
you
in
up
broader
to?
life? Sure, sure. So I'm currently in Brisbane. I'm a PhD student at the University of Queensland, uh, and I love it here. I do a number of other things throughout the university with some of our. In fact, do I have a mug here? Yeah, the Association of Postgraduate Students that I do some work with and try to do some outreach there. And aside from being a PhD student in ISME, I'm I believe the title is the convener of the Student Forum, formerly known as the Student Chapter. So we had that name change fairly recently, and I still the muscle memory every time I say student, the next word my tongue says chapter, and it shouldn't say that. I'm
Right.
trying to correct
Right.
it. But those are the two, I think, my two main wheelhouses these days, and that and I like to cook and make coffee and all the other things that young people like to do, I suppose.
That's awesome. I always find too when you start working through the university system or even a little bit as you're getting along in your career, you start finding like where your passion is. And
Mhm.
for me, that was always around sort of the U.S. marching band, concert
Oh
band sort
yeah.
of space. Like I always had a lot of interest in that growing up. Not that this podcast is about me, which maybe it should be. I don't know. I don't know that would be, but going into the sort of pep marching band land and around the whole dynamics of that and leadership, and that sort of became where I was really interested in the psychology of how everything worked and why students get involved in band. But have you found like a passion thing that you're working on right now? Is that the student forum or is that something else? Like, are you building guitars in the garage somewhere or?
Building guitars, God, no, I think that's a that's something well beyond any level of skill I think I'd ever possess. I have very little what would you say, creativity. I can't draw. I can't sculpt. I can't do pottery. I can't, for whatever reason, I've got finger-eye coordination for music, but the hand-eye is just not there for whatever reason. I don't know. So uh, I think the student chapter now, student forum, has become a bit of a passion project, especially since 2022, I believe it was, Jody Kirshner, president elect, tapped a few of us on the shoulder and said, "Do you want to start this idea that I've got going on?" And it slowly became a more important part of my life, and then became a more important, bigger part of my life. And then it became in the 2024 World Conference in Helsinki, it became a very how would you say, like a tangible part of my life. I finally saw all these people that I'd been working with digitally across Zoom and emails and such. Uh, I think that the passion project would uh, definitely be, well, for sure would be the student forum, but that has opened up a number of other avenues. The work I do with the University of Queensland's postgraduates, I see as very much, you would say, within the same Venn diagram of the same part of the Venn diagram there. I get to support students. We put on a couple of workshops. We have some free food every now and then because we all know postgraduates aren't the richest people around. So we get to support them in a variety of ways. So supporting students, perhaps selfishly because I am a student, but supporting students is it is a passion that I have turned into projects is a way that I would put that. Yeah.
I have to think that has to be really powerful to meet other people that are in the student forum from around the world at similar levels as far as like either experience or background or educational levels to you. Because I would imagine that as you have gone through school, you know, the pyramid goes up. So there's less PhD students than there are undergrad students, right? So the pool of people that you interact with, like if you only stayed talking to the people in your local peer group at the university, it probably is pretty small compared to what you'd have internationally. And I know one of the fascinating things for me from being based in the US for so long is sort of seeing everything through that lens. It's been really fascinating on how other people work and think about music education, the different cultures that come into it, how people approach it. So I think that has to be a pretty powerful experience for you to experience. I was searching for a
Oh,
different word, but come up with it. Yeah.
no, no, without a doubt that I think there's a couple of layers to that as well. And I'm sure you experienced this in a similar way in your capacity as CEO, is that I not only do I get to interact with other students, but then to speak with look, Patricia, sitting president Patricia, uh, in a couple of conversations we've had. It's interesting to see that, and maybe surprising for good or bad reasons, but to see that there are people that aren't students that are also passionate about students. And I wonder, of course, these people are teachers, and upon any level of reflection, it's obvious. But it's nice to see not only students passionate about what we are able to do for them, but then the academics and yourself as CEO, you've given me a great deal of support. I can say that. So to get that level of passion at multiple levels, oh God, it's uh, nothing short of equal parts inspiration and just so refreshing. And you're right about the student cohort matter. I think at the University of Queensland, the music school is quite small. I want to say we have maybe a couple dozen PhD students, maybe. It's probably closer to say 19, 20, something like that. So if I only stuck there, I probably wouldn't have nearly the friendships, the number nor the caliber or the quantity of friendships I have that I've fostered throughout his mate. It's been absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, I know being a high school band director for so long, and you tend to work in your local groups, right? So you know the local band directors you meet up, you have through the National Association for Music Education, you have your districts and your regionals, and it's all the same people. And I find that with certain nuances, you tend to all have this very similar experiences, very similar backgrounds. You tend to think in the same sort of direction. And what's been nice for me is you get these other experiences and other interactions that sort of shake up that worldview. People talk about this in terms of like when you travel, and of course as Australians you have to travel everywhere, right? So the idea is when you just interacting and how different cultures handle things and how they look at their school systems and how they view their communities, it's all very powerful. And I think ISME sometimes, even for me, has opened up that sort of worldview of looking at it. So I can see why it would be a powerful thing for students. So how did you even get started with ISME? Was it a
I was
flyer in the or in the post, if that is correct? I'm not sure which one, but
Yeah, it was a story I was thinking about at the World Conference actually, and I'll lead up to how that came up. So during during 2020, I was in Melbourne, and I don't know if you know anything about the state of Victoria and the city of Melbourne during the COVID-19 pandemic, but we fell into some significant and lengthy lockdowns with things like curfews. Police wanted people in home by 8 p.m. You couldn't travel more than, from memory, it was 5 or 10 kilometers from your house, except for work, things like that. So it was quite to pardon the pun, an isolating experience to have that level of isolation. And that's when I started. Obviously, I lost a lot of my performance work then. That's where my lengthy 8 years in the performance industry fell under. Uh, and I didn't I wasn't quite sure what to do. And I thought, well, I'm okay with words. I can string a few sentences together. I should probably do my honors year of my undergraduate. I did my Bachelor of Music, the 3 year bachelor at Monash and Monash University, and there was the fourth year honors. And I thought, well, I've got my thought was, well, I don't have much else to do. I might as well do something. So I thought maybe this would be something I could occupy my time with, and I was allocated a supervisor. And it was. Am I allowed to mention other members' names in this? Is that
Absolutely,
okay?
absolutely.
Yes.
Only if
Well,
there,
I hope.
we
Sorry.
only if it's negative, because we need those sound bites to get on social media.
Oh, of
Yeah,
course. Oh, it's absolutely scathing, I
yeah.
promise. So, remember Nicole Canham, who is at Monash University, who's a wonderfully esteemed music education and career development scholar. She was allocated to me. I didn't know her from a bar of soap. Another academic said she's really clever. You'll absolutely love working with her. I thought, sure, sounds great. And we were talking about getting into research. I didn't know how to research. To be honest, I barely knew how to write an essay because a lot of my education was performance based. Um, and she said, you need to check out these things called CPROM papers. And she just said it. She didn't write it down. And I thought, is that a person? Is that a, where do I find this? How do I spell this? So I ended up tracking it down, and I found some of the conference proceedings from a previous year, a previous conference. For the life of me, I couldn't tell you which it was, but my honors research was looking at musicians who played both jazz and popular music. I was calling them crossover musicians. And she said, "Oh, you're talking about careers. You need to check out the CPROM papers out of CPROM." I thought, that's interesting. I'll check that out. So that was my very first exposure with ISME. And then, to be honest, a lot of time went by, and there was no conference that I attended in 2020. 2022 came around, and my then supervisor, now supervisor as well, she was when Julie Ballantyne was supervising my master's degree. She said something to the effect of, "Well, are you going to ISME this year in 20?" She was saying for 2022. Pardon me, you're going to ISME. I thought, oh, ISME, I know what that is. Maybe I should go along. And I again sort of stumbled into it. I was familiar with CPROM, so I signed up for CPROM, and all my favorite scholars were there. All these people that I had read their work. Back then, I would have said inside and out. These days, I would say I barely understood a word, and maybe I don't now. But yeah, my first experiences with ISME was sort of two-part. They're very brief. Read these CPROM papers. I'm like, oh, that's fun. Who's that? I'll do that later. And then actually jumping into the 2022 conference. Uh, and I didn't present, I just attended CPROM and the World Conference. And uh, from there, that sort of little fire of, and you talk about the networks and meeting other students, meeting other academics. The conference was absolutely instrumental to that, because I realized, oh, there's a couple thousand people all throughout the world that are interested in this thing I am. And 99% of them are way, way smarter than me. I should probably get in touch with a lot of these people and try to develop some friendships and some do some networking. And from there, those first time experiences with ISME have, well, I'm sitting here talking to you, so it's taken me at least this far.
Yeah. Well, or that low. I'm not sure. Sometimes it's
It's
not going up. It's going down.
yet to
But
be
one of the things
determined.
I kid, of course. One of the things that strikes me is that I think as educators, we have this power that we don't realize when it's going to happen, but it happens. And I think when you were saying how Dr. Ballantyne had mentioned to you about coming to the conference, or they mentioned about CPROM, those little nuggets that are sort of dropped out have become very profound. And I can think back to very similar experiences in my own career, that somebody says something and for whatever reason it changes that sort of life direction for you, and they become throwaways for
Mm.
the teacher, not intentionally, but it's just something that they say like that, and that idea of getting people onto a certain resource or moving in a certain direction really sort of become those profound and moving moments. And I think it's one of the powers that teachers have, both good and bad, to be able to like tap into that and get that going. But I'm so glad they referred you to Ismay. So what
Oh,
has been your a short time, sometimes people have been with the organization for 20, 30, 40 years, but so far, what has been your most memorable experience?
that's so I realized I didn't actually end up finishing the story because I said that I was thinking about this at the World
Oh,
Conference, and this actually is the answer to that. So I uh,
quick
I
segue.
was at the perfect segue. Thank you for reminding me with your question. You're thinking around corners. I That's why you're CEO. I had a I was at CPROM this year, which was in Tallinn, Estonia, with Julie Ballantyne, my current supervisor, was there. Nicole Cannon, my former supervisor, was there, and also Jodie Kirshner, who's the president elect, of course, and she's been a wonderful mentor to me throughout the student chapter time. And I was sitting at lunch with those three, and I had quite a bizarre realization that Nicole is the reason I know what Ismay is. Julie is the reason that I'm has been instrumental in making me anything resembling a scholar. And then Jodie has been a mentor figure for me for the last couple of years. And these three women were at the table with me, and I'm thinking, oh, this is the most important table in my life. It was very bizarre to have these three people who are from three different cities. We're from two different countries between us. But that table at lunch was in a quite a bizarre way, a really memorable experience because it was all the people that had gotten me this far were in one place. It was absolutely remarkable, and I realized that I said, "Oh, Nicole is the reason that I'm here." So I think I said to Nicole, in 20 years when I'm professor, I'll say that I owe you some kind of tithe. Maybe I'm not sure. So I think uh, I think I owe her a great deal. But that was such a memorable experience. And if I'm allowed a number two as well, because that was we'll call that my most memorable experience of CPROM. How about I shoehorn something in there? But
I see
of
what you're
ISME
doing.
of the
Yeah.
World Conference, I had a crafty. I had a the student chapter at the time, now student forum. We had a number of sessions that we did. We did a session on publishing, where we had Gwen Moore and Pepe discussing the ins and outs of publishing at the early level. And then we had some the MISTech commissioners come and talk to us, talk to the student membership about, I suppose, just about developing their careers as music educators and scholars, and how you have the practitioner and the researcher side, the education practitioner and researcher side by side. And it's I suppose it's not one memorable moment or anything, but those two chapters is the wrong word. Those two episodes, as you would call them, of the World Conference were so memorable because it was, as I mentioned, that passion that I had developed of wanting to support these students, and everyone was in that room and they were enthusiastic. They were asking questions, and I was asking questions, and Gwen and Pepe and the MISTech commissioners were responding. And it was one of the first times I can remember having such genuine dialogue with people all concerned about the same thing. And that same thing, if I tried to get down to its essence, is something like lineage or progression. Like Gwen and Pepe have this understandings. We don't. How do we meet where they are so we can be them one day? And it was this really enriching experience. So, pardon me for taking two memorable experiences, but I those were so wonderful. Sitting at that table and then having those sessions at the student chapter, at the World Conference for the student chapter. It was so much fun.
And I think one of the exciting things about, well, maybe exciting and daunting at the same time about the music world in general, it's a very small world. It doesn't seem like it is, but especially if you're on like the music education side or the nonprofit side, like I deal with, everyone knows everyone else. We've all intersected at some point, or it's like the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, if you've heard of that, like where you're only separated a
Yes.
little bit by someone who knows you because they met somebody else. And I just got a text message today from a Disney member that said, "Oh, the new director of bands knows you from this job," and it's just one of those things that comes up and keeps going down. So I think that impression and like network building becomes very important, and I think sometimes
Oh,
can
yeah.
get overlooked when you're younger, right? I know when what would they say, vim and vigor or something like that, or vinegar, I don't know, whatever the expression is, right? But when you get out of undergrad and you're excited, I went right into grad school, but you get out and you're like excited to start. I'm going to do this on my own, and I'm going to do this, make these things happen, and then you start realizing as you spend more time out in the world, quote unquote, how much your network matters, right? And how much you try to build as many relationships as you can,
Mm-hmm.
and not burn the bridges, quote unquote, but build those networks, so because you don't know who's going to connect to who at some point. And I know some of the attendees at the ISME World Conference this past summer in Helsinki were so excited because these were people that they cited in their papers or they read all their work, so they read over it, and they wanted me to introduce people to them because they were scared to go up and say so themselves, that
Oh,
it was such an honor for them. And I think sometimes we don't fully understand that sort of power, or understand the power of networking behind it. So I'm glad you had that moment to enjoy that at the conference. So now that you've been with ISME for a few biennium at this point, I don't know why I tried to air quote that, but it happened, and we're not going to edit that out. I think I just got in that mode, that's what happens. Why have you continued with ISME? Like, why didn't you just decide, I'm going to go to the conference and then this is good, and I'm out. That's enough. I can't take these people anymore,
mm.
and you move on. Why have you decided? Have you found like your group, or has it been like a network, or what has been that sort of moment that you decided, I'm going to continue with ISME?
It's it's an interesting question that I think I'll have to be greedy and ask for a two-part response, a bipartite
Absolutely.
response, if I may. I it's well, this podcast, of course, is my last straw. I'm out after this, just to make that clear.
This is it. You're
I
done.
I think there's two things. Uh, one is the what would you say, the anticipation and the, you would say, the knowledge that I know that that experience at the World Conference, and the friends that I have throughout the student forum, and say the membership committee, and the people that I know through that, the knowledge that I will continue to be able to work with those people and not just be friends and have the occasional email, but work on things together. I think there's something very deep about that, to be able to work together on something that is bigger than yourself. Listen to me talking wise as a
Mhm.
29-year-old. In 20 years, I'm going to look at this and be disgusted. But there is something really wonderful about working on something that will maybe not outlive, but will exceed you. And even at my young age, I think I get that, and I love that. I really, really do. And I'm looking at my last term as the student forum convener throughout this next couple of years, and I see the student forum as a bit of, a bit of my baby, and I want to give that to people that are going to care, uh, and then to be able to watch that grow over the next 20, 30, 40 years. Who knows how long I'll live, but 20, 30, 40 years. And how wonderful would it be to look back on that and see all the people that I have worked with, and have we've all come up in this space together. So there's that knowledge that I'll be able to keep working with those people. Uh, which is such a privilege, because, as I said, 99% of them, let's say 99.99, probably 100, know way more than me, maybe more than I could ever know. So to be able to continue associating with those people is nothing short of a privilege, to be honest. But then I think the other that there's a second part to that, that is sort of looking the other way. So one is a retrospect, is what would you like, a desired retrospective. I want to be able to look back, but then there's also an excitement of looking forward. And I had I forget what it was. It was a meeting that I was in with Beauvoir, the past president, while he was sitting president. And I said something funny like, in 2050, Beauvoir, I'm coming for your job. I'll be president. And then for a while we had an inside joke where he started calling me, I think it was like Mr. 2050, or Hayden 2050 or something. We had a funny joke, but there is that desire to, I suppose, looking forward and be like these people, like my dear Jody Kirshner, who I absolutely adore, is now president elect, and I don't know. Could I? You sit there wondering, could I do that someday? Is that something I will be doing? Is that the right thing for me? But there is that desire to then look in those spaces and think, well, could I? What could I do in those spaces? Could I contribute? Could I be as impactful and uh, what, what's the word I'm looking for? I suppose useful as these people are. Will I be able to contribute as much as they will or have been contributing? Will I be able to do that one day? So it would be wonderful to be able to look, in 20 years, look back on my time in 20, 30, 40, 100 years. Who knows what medicine will do at ISME, and think, oh, I started as, little student chapter. I'll look at this video and think, God, I looked so much younger then. Uh, and then I'll be sitting there and, you'll be crowning me president or something. And I think, oh, look, now here's my shot. Now I can't screw it up. But it's the friendships of the people, but also the opportunity to contribute to ISME, which is ISME's given me so much, and I'm sure it will continue to give me things. So the only thing I want to do, the only things I want to do is keep keep receiving and keep giving, I suppose, is what I'm after.
Yeah, it's always I think it took me a while to come to a realization of like what I enjoy doing and where is my place. And one of the things, and I think what I'm hearing in this is I recognize myself as I'm a builder, and not in the sense of like I'm going to start building a house, but I like working with something like an ISME and seeing where can we go? Where can we take this? How can we make it better? How can we make it more impactful? How can we grow membership? All those things that I become really interested in, right? And I think that's where I'm hearing your side of things is saying like where's my usefulness in this? Like, can I be useful? Can
Mm,
I help make it better? Can I help do those things? Because there are people that just like maintaining. They really just love doing like the everyday maintaining things. And for me, that's when my interest starts going down. That's when
I
it's
see.
like
Yeah.
if you saw the graph, it would just drop off at that point. But I'm really interested when it's building. And when I see an opportunity or see areas where there can be growth. And I think then after that it becomes what's the legacy of it? How we left a legacy. So I think
Mm,
the idea that you're coming in and saying like, how can I be useful? How can I do these things? And not every person's like that, but and not every person should be like that. But you wish that more people would look at it and say, where's my usefulness to this? Because I think sometimes every organization I got involved with, at least that I remember outside the Cub Scouts in the United States here, I did get kicked out of the Cub Scouts. I don't think there's an official record of that anywhere, but but there's some file somewhere in somebody's basement. Oh yeah, I remember this. Uh, but I think every
I didn't know that
organization that
about
I've
you.
got involved with, I always end up in these positions of like, oh, very much like you have. Like you start off on some committee or some sort of group, and then you matriculate up and you start doing those things because you realize there's this usefulness to make it better and to do those things. And I think that's
Mm,
just so important because the organization, ISME as a whole, is a membership organization. We only move as fast as the membership moves, and they're represented and they have that. But people are working full time students, so it becomes very important to have, I think, all of those voices and to everybody going in the same direction because that rising tide is going to float all boats. So if we're all working and we're all advocating for music or researching or connecting or doing this, it's only going to make our field stronger and make people's experience with
absolutely.
music stronger. So I think those words become very important. And so my last question is going to be
Oh,
in this case, getting into like what's your advice if you had to do something over again? And sometimes I ask people like, what's your advice for teaching or maybe getting to college? Or if you look back and you mentioned about the piano, and I have a shared experience there in that I never learned piano, but I wish I would have learned piano because I'm a trumpet player, which means my left hand is fairly incompetent. Just hangs out there, like this one's. But like, what's your one piece of advice for somebody that's looking to get into a career in music or looking maybe to start a PhD program? Because that's a big journey, right? When you get involved with a
Mm.
PhD. I never was that thoughtful about things. I was like, oh, this seems like a good idea. And then I would jump in and start doing it. But I know for some people, they have to leave full-time jobs. They have to take out loans. They have to seek scholarships. They have to find programs. What sort of advice would you have for those people out there?
Well, but I will say that me giving advice to anyone is does sort of strike me as comedy. I hope Julie doesn't watch this. Um, but I think perhaps there are some things I can offer some advice in. I think, look, regarding the PhD program, I don't know that I think I've made the right choice by doing this. For me, being say a professor or an academic, it's something I've wanted for a very long time. So the PhD was something that once it was offered to me, I knew and I don't know that I necessarily listened to this, but there was a listened in terms of listen to the voice in my head necessarily, but I knew that it was something I couldn't say no to and was something I was going to do eventually. I knew I had to. And I know that's not everyone's journey. I speak to a number of my PhD colleagues and cohort who say that the PhD is the end of education for them, and they'll go do something else after this, and I understand that as well. But practical advice for getting into a PhD, at least in Australia, is get a really, really good supervisor. I'm sure everyone has heard that advice 10 times over. I was fortunate to have Nicole Canham and Julie Ballantyne, who I'm not sure you can get much better than those two. So they're mine. You can't have them. I'm sorry.
Hmm.
But I don't think I would be less than half the individual I have there if they hadn't been guiding me through that process. Um, I think there's, at least in what's gotten me, you say to this level, this measly level that I'm sitting at. I remember a Gary Burton quote. Do you know Gary Burton? He's a vibraphone player, vibraphone player in the US. And I'm going to attribute this quote to him, but I don't know if it is him. But he said, allegedly in some presentation that was given maybe to some college students or something, he said something like, "If you want to be a musician, think, uh, don't do it. Don't you dare do it. You're wasting your time and you will live a miserable life." I'm paraphrasing here. He says, but if you have to be a musician, think very, very carefully. And there is a macabre sort of fascination I've had with that quote for some time, because it's this idea of wanting something versus needing something. And I think with there are things that I want out of my career as an academic. You know, in Australia, academics, they're paid fairly well, and that would be nice. It'd be nice to have that security. It'd be nice to have a lot of, say, sway within an organization, such as a university or within ISME. These things are things that I want. But in terms of things that I need, I think I need to, say, contribute to a legacy of something like ISME. I need to study the things that I want to study within an academic capacity. And I need to mentor with any experience I get over the next couple of decades. I need to give that to other people who are the age I am now in the future. I need to do those things. And for me, the PhD is the ticket into those things.
Mhm.
So that's my that's what I want to make my wheelhouse, I suppose. These are the things I need to do, and I've tried to tailor those things there. Who knows if I'll get to do them, or perhaps my needs change. But in terms of goodness advice, I don't think I'm the right person to ask for advice. I think my advice would be find someone who gives you really good advice, because I think I'm just spouting things other people have told me. But wants
Oh,
versus
that's
needs
really good advice.
and understanding those things. Yeah, yeah. Well, how about this? My advice is go to Julie Ballantyne for your advice.
Well, we'll make sure I'll put her email in the description so everybody can email
Oh
her
God.
questions
Well,
and no, don't do that. Don't do that.
I'm
I'm
gonna
kidding.
resign from
Yeah.
the University of Queensland now.
It always feels a little egocentric, I guess, to give advice and to I have very similar discussions with music majors in the US all the time. People, especially that are
Mm.
getting into music education, and to realize that it's maybe not the path that they envisioned, and many people become their, they get into being a music major because they want to become their band director or choir director or what have you, or they want to do the opposite of what they did, and they're like, I will be the opposite of what they did, and I will be so. And it's not about that. It has to be about you. You can't fight off the good demon and bad demon on the shoulders, right? You
Mm.
have to figure out what you want to do, and is this a passion that you want to be able to do, because it's going to be day in and day out, and you're going to have to live that sort of path that whole time. So it becomes really important to think
Yeah,
about what that's like in your journey. But you're very
certainly.
reflective, and it was great getting a chance to speak with you a little bit more.
Wonderful.
And
Yeah.
now I also remember you telling me that you were a gymnast at one point.
Oh, yes. Goodness me, you're going to the deep cuts here. Yes, I'm a younger Hayden. I think I started when I was, say, 5 or 6. I was a gymnast, and if I can toot my own horn, toot my own trumpet, to use a word familiar to you, I was a pretty good one. I was a pretty good one. So my apparatus was the rings. That was the main one, and I also did parallel bars from memory. We're really going back here, but I was a gymnast. I represented my state, the state of Victoria, and I was on the path to start representing Australia at some capacity, and then I injured myself one too many times, and the powers that be, the powers that were, said, "Sorry, can't take you anymore." And and ironically, that's when I picked up the guitar. So if they hadn't said no, I would not be sitting in this chair. So uh, perhaps I have a responsibility to that moment. Say, well, if I can't be a gymnast, I'm going to be a damn good musician. So I don't know.
Right, right.
But
That's
yes,
that's
yes, you've
I
revealed my
that
secret.
story. It's not the first time I've heard that exact same story.
Yeah.
Somebody went to be a gymnast and got injured and then decided to be a guitar player. I think that's where one in every two guitar players actually comes from, is from that same
Yeah.
exact story. No, I'm kidding.
Oh,
Of
absolutely.
course, it may well
I
it's
unironically agree.
that's what you get. It's good to make us. Well,
I
that
am
was a little
a
bonus,
yeah.
but I thought that was fascinating when you told me about that at the Helsinki World Conference. But thank you for joining us for Our Stories, Our Members, episode 2. It was a pleasure to get to learn a little bit more about you. And if you haven't got a chance to check out our YouTube channel, please do that. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you once again, Mr. Hayden Mitt.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you for your time.